and you are watching, wow, look at how big my head is. You are watching our latest, I'm going to just bring that down a little bit, our latest program, our live stream, where we talk about the big issues related to copiosis and some of the sticky questions with our devil's advocate, Jill the Pill. Hi, Jill. Jill the Pill Dell. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff this session, and we have a guest with us. We have our CTO, Jarek Spiginer, join us. Hey, Jarek, how's it going?
Hi, everyone.
It's good to see you. And so I think, as usual, Jill had something to kick us off with. But before she does that, let me just say, if you are interested in following what we're doing, and this is your first time, you can go down here to copiosis.com and look at all the content that we have available for new people to find out more about how our innovation works and how we're implementing it in the real world. Interesting that I just said that, because we're going to be talking a lot about our implementation today, I think. And then also, if you're wanting to find out how we administer the funds that we get from people, you can go to this website here, find out more about that. And if you're even interested, you can become a patron yourself of our implementation plan. And then also, if you are interested in finding out or being notified in advance of our upcoming shows here on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that bell, because every time we load a new video, you will get a direct personal notification that that is what we've done. And that way you won't miss any episodes. We're going to be scheduling some more episodes in the future beyond the ones we already have scheduled. So you'll be getting some notifications of those, and you can put a reminder on your YouTube channel so that you can get notified of our upcoming live streams. Okay, without further ado, let's have Jill take it over. And Jill, lead us, introduce this session. What are we talking about today?
Okay, so we're talking about the impossibility of copiosis actually happening. So this is a pushback that I get from people that I have discussions with, that, you know, oh, well, yeah, it might be a great thing, but it's just impossible for it to happen. You know, and it's just an old big hippy dippy cult, whatever. I mean, it just, I've heard a lot, right? You know, yeah. And you know, I get that it comes from, you know, these people don't really even know what it is or understand it or get what it's trying to accomplish. But okay, I wanted to start with a quote that I thought sort of kicks off how it is possible. Okay, so Howard Zinn, who was an activist and very educated man, said, "What matters is the countless small deeds of unknown people who lay the basis of significant events that change history." So, you know, I look at, people never believed that slavery would be eliminated. Not that it has, it's just changed, but we could talk about that in another session. And people believe that, you know, segregation in the South would never be changed, that, you know, women would never be given the right to vote. I mean, on and on and on throughout history, change has happened because very small groups of people have taken action to and come up with the thoughts around how it should be changed, yeah, and move that forward.
Yeah.
So I just, you know, I just want your thoughts on how is this even possible, right? How is it possible?
Yeah, early on, we published a blog that, or maybe it was a web page on copiosis.com that listed like 50 things that the majority of humanity, or a lot of humanity, said, especially some learned experts, said would never happen, or that were foolhardy investments of human energy and attention. Some of those things were the steam engine, the locomotive, steamships, women voting, of course. And then other things less grand, like the automobile, the cotton gin, and other
Hmm.
inventions. There were a lot of
Right.
people with all of these inventions that a lot of people, a lot of learned experts who said that these things were impossible when they first came out. But today, except for the cotton gin and the steam engine and the steamship, we still have all of those
Hmm.
things, and
Yeah.
we enjoy the benefits those things provide. So, what is it that causes some people to perceive something as impossible, and how is it that the people who are working on copiosis don't have that perception? And I think that's the question you're really asking.
Pretty
Yeah,
much. Yeah,
yeah,
pretty much. And then, you know, yeah, that's it. That's the crux of it.
yeah.
Okay.
And the answer is different for different people on the team. Like you said before we came onto the show, um, most everybody is at that point with copiosis who are on the team, but they've come to that conclusion from different perspectives. And
Sure.
my perspective is a perspective grounded in my personal spirituality, number one, but also in essentially looking at the world around me and realizing that many of the things that people thought were impossible are actually commonplace today. And my own belief that some certain things were impossible, and my maturing out of that belief as I saw the things that I thought were impossible become actually possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
it's interesting, and Jarek, please feel free to jump in here at any time. It's interesting that when people, it's so peculiar. People say that copiosis is impossible while at the same time ignoring the fact that it has gotten as far as it has gotten in the 7 years that we've been implementing copiosis. And that's not to say that we've come a long way. But when someone says it can't happen, it flies in the face of the fact that it actually is happening, because the things that happen have to start somewhere. And that usually
Right.
starts with one person. And then eventually over time, that one person accumulates about themselves more and more tangible evidence of the thing that they wanted to happen, including other people and resources and people following what that
Hmm.
person's doing, and so on and so on. And that's what we have today, is we have all of that happening. And so when someone says that it can't happen, I point to the fact that it is happening, and we right now it is happening.
Yeah. 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 So, um, yeah, I think part of part of it is that people are so entrenched in the current social economic programs that they're in, the positions that they're in, and all the beliefs surrounding those different social economic systems that okay, so kind of what's interesting to me is that uh, throughout the ages, man has tried to create different social economic programs or systems
Mhm.
that do X, Y, or Z, that take care of people, that make a better world, that blah,
Mhm.
blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, the basics of those fundamentals that for that system um, didn't turn out, didn't give the results that the initial believers in that system were expecting.
Yeah,
Okay. So what is
different.
and we've been struggling with this since man started forming communities. So what I find interesting about copiosis, and maybe I'm hoping others will, is that it sort of gets back to the very, very basic roots of community. It takes removing centralized government puts the work, puts the production, puts the will and the wishes back into the individual, which is what kind of they've all tried to do, is give power to the individual. But because of the centralized government and because of all of the factors involved in that, hasn't happened. And isn't happening and isn't going to happen under the current system.
Yeah, Jared, again, feel free to jump in here at any time. I think what we've seen historically is people have attempted to create a new economic reality for the planet, but in their attempt, they haven't tried to influence the fundamental underlying issues. And that's why we call what we're doing at Copiosis fundamental change, is because if you look at communism or socialism or pretty much most ideas that I'm familiar with, they all still have some form of money and some sort of exchange process happening in them. And they also, except for some of the leading edge ones like I want to say like TZM, but I could be wrong here in this assertion, they still have some sort of governing organization, like a government. And so
Yes.
our system doesn't have any of that. And it is radical in that sense because it does, there's this indoctrination that we all share, which is to say we can't govern ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're too stupid to govern ourselves.
Stupid. Yeah.
It would just be chaos. It would just be, people would do this and they do that, and it would just be horrific. And how do we control anybody if we don't have this authority over us to control ourselves, But somehow we managed to pretty much control ourselves, even, and it's not just the threat of arrest or, all that.
Well, it's sort of the same mindset that, back before democracy, the idea of democracy was this utopia that would never happen, this impossible idea. Like, how could you even think that, the peasants could be equal to the, what was it, the lords?
The lords.
Yeah. It's like, it's insane. Like, this is not just an impossible idea. Like, this is something that we don't want.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, like in Gladiator, the movie Gladiator, Caesar talks about how democracy is just a whisper, right? It's so fragile and it's so frightening to people that it's just whispered about. So I feel like we are in the whisper stage, but we're not fragile. We are strong. And and it's a beautiful whisper, and the more people that can hear the truth of it, the more they will see that we have to do something different. Whether Copiosis turns out to be exactly how we might imagine it today, maybe it will turn out to be something much greater and richer and better, and I mean, who knows? But so
we have a couple of comments that came in. One from KJ says, don't forget debt and obligation with regard to making things impossible. And then he also says, and about controlling and allocating resources. Seems like that's really at the root of everything. And so, I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, Jill, in the old days, and in large measure still today. And I don't mean this as a pejorative label, but the rich and powerful some of the rich and powerful believe that the rest of us aren't smart enough to manage ourselves. And that was one of the essential reasons why the founders of the United States agreed to a republic instead of a true democracy, because they didn't
Exactly.
think we could govern ourselves. And the other reason, and there's probably others, but the other reason was they were afraid that in a true democracy, the 99% would basically level the playing field with regard to property ownership. And so,
Right.
in order for that to happen, the property of the rich would have to be redistributed in some way. And the founding fathers were really afraid of that.
Yeah. Well, they're still afraid of that.
Well, yeah.
Right.
But the strange thing is, a lot of the majority is afraid of that too. That's why they
Sure.
don't like
Well,
taxes.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's one of the conversations that I had recently is um, like today on Facebook, they were talking about, Google and all these companies, shutting down information and all of that. And they're like, well, they're a company and it can hurt their bottom line. And, it's so they can do whatever they want. Then my pushback on that was, well, not exactly, because corporations have been deemed a person according to the 14th Amendment. So no person has the right to oppress another person's freedom of speech. That's what freedom of speech is about. So you can't have it both ways. If you're going to be a person and you're going to have the rights of a person, then you have to respect the rights of others. So
Well, it's interesting
there's some
because
interesting things.
it intersects with private property rights also. And so,
Exactly.
as if an organization, so I don't know if Twitter is a public company, like if it has stockholders. Do you know, Jarek? Is it a public company or a private company?
Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it is
Yeah.
either. But either way, the property that is Twitter, the social network, is owned by the shareholders. And the shareholders are not a state. And so freedom of speech doesn't apply to a private company. The protection, the not to be infringed upon, that part of the Constitution does not apply to a private company. It applies to a state. And so a company, whether it's recognized as a person or not, can do whatever it wants with its private property so long as it's not breaking the law. And the amendment about free speech, there's no law being broken because free speech, the right to free speech doesn't apply to a private company. That's why a brick and mortar company can have a sign outside that says, if you don't have any shoes or you don't have any shirt on, you don't get any service. Or if you're in a theater and you scream fire, you can be prosecuted for that. That's free speech, but you're putting the lives of others in danger if there isn't actually a fire in the theater. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and you're potentially
But
making the company liable if those people get trampled.
right, but I'm not talking about private companies. I'm talking about corporations.
Well, a
I'm
corporation,
talking,
in a sense, the corporation is owned by its shareholders. Yes, it's a public corporation, but the shareholders still get to make the decisions, and they aren't a state. Now, where the overlap or the intersection occurs is where people say, well, yeah, Perry, but Twitter has their product is now is considered the commons, like it's like a public square almost.
exactly.
Except it's not a public square. It functions like one, but it's not, because a true public square is owned by the government and by
But
extension by all of
but
us.
let's not talk about Twitter. Let's talk about Google or Facebook. Let's talk about Facebook
Okay.
because that's where a lot of the conversations are happening. Facebook is a publicly sold, publicly owned, basically, if you look at it, company, and the basis of a corporation is that a corporation has rights because they are considered a person under the 14th Amendment, even though they're not physically alive or a person. So therefore, they are entitled to the same rights as a person. But it would seem to me that if you're entitled to the same rights as a person and you enjoy the benefits of those rights, then you are subject to the same rules as a person.
Well, so let's go back to the freedom of speech. It probably would be helpful, and maybe if KJ is watching, he could go on to Wikipedia, copy the 14th Amendment, and paste it in the comments section so we can read it specifically. But the freedom of speech I don't think applies to a person restricting the free speech of another, does it? Like, for example, if you're in my house and you're talking about using the N-word, talking about black people, I have the right to throw you out of my house. And you don't have the right to exert, this is free speech, and stay in my house and continue using the N-word.
But if I am in public, if I'm not in your house, let's say I'm in a public square, a public space, and I am spouting my, beliefs, whatever they are, it's my understanding that you as a person, you could shout your beliefs and try to shout over me, but you don't have the right to stop me from espousing my beliefs in that public space, in that public square. And frankly, Facebook is a public square.
Well, it
anyway,
seems,
I'm not sure
no,
that we even want to go.
No, this is good. This is good. It seems to function that way, but it has a set of what they call the terms of service that everyone agrees to in order to participate in that square. And the terms of service don't allow someone to come on and onto Facebook and say certain things. There's a long list of things that you can't do on Facebook. So, and that list is created by Facebook. And so, so it isn't really a public square in that sense, because Facebook sets the rules. And if you want to, and you're not paying for it. If you want to use Facebook, you have to agree to the rules, but you get to use it for free. So it's not really what we think it is, although we act like.
I think it can be argued either way. I think there are people that are on both sides of this debate in whether or not the First Amendment should apply to Facebook, or does apply, I guess, technically. And this is the First Amendment, by the way. I think
you're right. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Free speech is the First Amendment, right?
Yeah. It's definitely, my understanding is it's definitely open to debate. But the question is, if we do consider this to be a public, like a public forum, then we have to sort of treat all of these companies the same way and develop sort of a standard that they can all adhere to. Because right now it's very ad hoc, right? Like, so we banned, the president from Twitter.
Yeah.
But are we really saying that he's worse than all of the other terrorist organizations or
exactly. All that.
All these other leaders in these other countries that we would consider to be not even having democracy in any semblance, and yet they keep their Twitter account. It's like, and also if you really look and see what Trump actually said in the last week, is it really worse than the things that he said in the last 4 years? Arguably, it's not worse. I mean, you can certainly find things he said in the past that seem more inflammatory than the things he said on Twitter in the last week. And so the problem really is just that there's no standard. It's very ad hoc. It's kind of, there's somebody at Twitter, we don't know who, we don't know why, and they just decided to ban Trump specifically, this one individual. It's not based really on a set of rules, because if they really were following their terms of conditions uniformly, there'd be so many more people that would have been banned a long time ago.
Yes.
So
I agree.
I think we need to develop a more kind of universally agreed to standard that we can all agree, like when is the line crossed? When is it not? Because right now it's just somebody at Twitter deciding this person doesn't belong on Twitter.
Interesting.
It is interesting because a lot of conservatives have flocked to Parler, which is the Twitter clone for conservatives essentially. And now Parler has been kicked off of the Amazon Web Services servers. Apple no longer carries Parler, and some other service providers to Parler have stopped supporting their service.
Amazon Web Services.
Yep. And so
part of our whole cancel culture that's happening right now. If you don't like what somebody's saying, you just cancel them.
Well, so it's interesting because there's and this is gonna get tied to copiosis here in just a few minutes.
Right. Yes.
But it's interesting because it's a problem. It's a potential problem in copiosis. So, but it's interesting because part of the reason why I think people are responding in the way they are and companies are responding in the way they are is because there is, or at least appears to be, evidence of an organized process to overthrow the little bit of democracy that our republic has in it.
Yes.
And
that is the crux of it, is that because of the pandemic and the way it's been handled by our government, and just the way that our liberties have been infringed upon, it all feels like an increasing level of oppression that is very frightening to people. And is it a reality? I see what blew me away is that how, okay, the Capitol in Washington, D.C. is one of the most secure and protected places in the world. So how could these people possibly get in the door unless it was allowed for whatever reason?
Yeah, we're gonna have a live stream coming up here with our political strategist Christopher Hatton, and hopefully Jarek will join us too. I sent you a message, Jarek. And if you're interested, Jill, you can join us in that live stream too. We haven't scheduled it yet, but it's in the works, and we're going to talk about the breach of the Capitol and all of that. But what's interesting to me is to think about all of this in the context of copiosis and the future.
Exactly.
So like, what in copiosis, first of all, with regard to your most recent comment and oppression. So as I think through the COVID circumstance, my initial thought is, well, COVID wouldn't have gotten out of hand in copiosis because there would have been no competing sides relative to tamping down on the evidence once it first showed itself. And people who helped tamp it down, including the people in the citizenry in China, presuming it started there, would have been paid to do so. So they wouldn't have lost any livelihood to do what was necessary to control the spread of the virus. But if it did get out of control and ended up becoming a pandemic, would people still feel they were oppressed if they were told to stay at home and received MBR only if they stayed at home? Or maybe not only, because there's other MBR streams that would be coming in from other acts that they've done in the past. But I mean, that's the question I ask. And I could see how some people might in the future respond just like they're responding now and say, hell no, I'm going to go out anyway. I don't care about that little bit of MBR I was going to get for staying home. I want to go and do whatever it is I wanted to do.
Right, exactly. And to me, that I guess in my perspective, that's the way that it should be.
But
if
what
you're
about,
willing, let me finish. Okay. So if you're willing to put yourself at risk for that, and you are have been truthfully and the information that you have received has actually been verified and I'm speaking in terms of if we were in a copiosis situation, that we would definitely have a lot more information.
Yes.
And that information would be certainly more accurate, and the disinformation or the untruths could be much more quickly revealed, and the evidence presented to people for their review in a much better manner. And then why do we as people in copiosis need to, what the desire is that you wear a mask to protect yourself and others, and that you I'm not sure that the staying at home, if you can function from home and that works, but you're not under any obligation to go into the office and work, or, you could work out that you do whatever you were doing at home. But it's so indiscriminate the way it's been handled. Like, I just see it as being completely different. Like, if you do stay home, we're going to give you NBR for doing that because we know that's going to be helpful in not spreading the disease. But then there's the whole argument about, well, is it better to have herd immunity and just a natural herd immunity, which is what happened after the last pandemic. So, what's the trade-offs and what is the value? And I guess the people that, each community could make their own decisions about how they personally are going to handle it in their community, rather than it just being this broad sweep.
Well,
or this.
I think if we kind of look at these different factors, so herd immunity is a good thing. So is reducing the number of deaths. So what is the solution that accomplishes both of those things?
Right.
Staying at home, waiting until you get a vaccine, and then getting herd immunity through a vaccine rather than being exposed to the actual virus is probably the more optimal way to go about getting herd immunity.
Would you agree with that, Jill?
I don't really want to express opinions about what is the best solution, because I don't have enough information myself to make those opinions or to support one side or the other or whatever.
Well, think of it this way then. What solution do you consider to be a better solution? One in which herd immunity is accomplished through more people dying or less people dying? Given everything else being equal.
I don't have an answer for you because I'm not in the field. I don't know the history of viruses and pandemics and how they've been handled previously, or if they even had an understanding of how they might be handled differently.
Well, I don't mean to hold your feet to the fire, but I'm going to do that because Jarek is asking a simple question that doesn't require any sort of real medical education. He's just saying, hey, look, we have two options here to reach herd immunity, which I think, let's just say we're a community, which I think we all agree is the way to go. We want to get herd immunity. Or herd immunity. There's two ways. We can walk all about and people will spread it and get sick and die, and eventually we'll reach herd immunity. We can go that way, or we could go this other way where everyone just stays home till the vaccine is ready. We vaccinate everybody, assuming that there's no issues with vaccines, and then everyone gets to herd immunity. So one, you have deaths, some number of deaths, and others, you have fewer deaths. So which one would you prefer? The one with the deaths or the one with the fewer deaths?
I don't see it as an either or. I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a combination of both. for the people that are at risk, which are, of course, people with,
Yeah.
conditions that put them at risk, or age, or whatever it is that would put a person at risk, that those people should,
Stay home.
wear masks and stay home and do what they do. For the rest of the community, just like, these viruses go around the world all the time. And maybe this one is more viral than others and more deadly than others. But for the rest of the community, go out, wear your masks, take all the precautions that you can not to get the disease. But it is going to spread through the community. I mean, it's a force of nature that you can't stop. It's going to run its course. And I think it's like any other virus. It's going to run its course no matter what we do. And I don't know that, I have, I think the problem is now that we actually have, the shot to get to, protect you, that there's much faith in it because of all the minutia that has happened around the way COVID has been treated. So I didn't mean for the program to kind of go into this whole storyline, but I think it's just a reflection of the frustration of people, the summary of the current events, the reason why it is so important for a new social economic system, so that a lot of these, why would it be necessary for a town of 300 people to take the kind of precautions that are done in a major city when, if they have someone visiting from out of town, they, could make certain that those people are not infected before they visit. There's other precautions that they could take. There's things that they could do differently, but their own little town can just function like it functions.
Well, and so in copiosis, that certainly would be, I would expect, the outcome, because you can't, there's no authority that can control that little town other than the people that are in that little town. And so they get to decide
how they want to handle it.
Yeah. And their rewards will be on that particular decision will be based on how effective they are. Now, if you notice across the world, some countries have been more effective than others in terms of, if you imagine the countries being communities, some communities have been more effective than others in the decisions that they've made, and the willingness of the community members to follow those decisions. And so we've seen both how ugly it can get and how clean it can be done. And to be honest, I could be wrong. I haven't done the research, but it seems like the ones who did it the cleanest were the ones who agreed to stay home.
But they haven't created any herd immunity. So once they get back out there and they start moving around and they get back to life.
Well, so the virologists talked about the surges and all those kind of things, but I presume that the idea would be that you would continue to do this until a vaccine was available. Then you vaccinate everyone, and then you'd be able to sustain a herd immunity arrival, because most of the people would be vaccinated. So you'd have fewer deaths in the march toward herd immunity. But so this is a challenge for copiosis, as it has been for the world, because in copiosis there's not going to be any sort of authority that can tell people to stay home and force them to be that way. And so in large measure, you're going to get what you're talking about, Jill, where some people are going to do it and some people aren't going to do it. Hopefully that when people get MBR for doing it, others will do it too, because they'll see those people get that MBR, but some people aren't going to care.
And then
But
some of
people
this
don't
may
care about
even,
that.
it's sort of a balance of values, right? Some communities may value keeping people alive more than making sure that people feel free to, go about and do their things as normal, or vice
Yeah.
versa. There may be some communities that feel like it's more important that people feel free to just go about their normal everyday lives. And they are less concerned about, people dying. Maybe they have a belief system that accepts that as a
Fact of
not a
life.
terrible thing, right?
Yeah.
Like a transition to something better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe in those communities, they're like, yeah, our
Yeah.
old people are probably going to die. We're okay with that. They're okay with that. And maybe in those communities, we just go on as normal. I mean,
Right,
it's,
right. Yeah. And I was just going to say, like, how would NBR, like, how would the algorithm look at, is there value in people dying? Right? Like, what is the value of a person dying? I mean, if you really want to look at that, how's it going to calculate that? Right? So there's like what, one less mouth to feed, or there's, like there's
My
one
mom
less
used to say
person
that.
creating garbage on the earth. There's one less person, whatever. And would it value it according to like that person's reputation account? They're a total asshole, never did anything good for their community or
I'll let you take this one,
anything in
Perry.
the world. So thank God they're freaking dead. I'm giving everybody 300 MBRs because this asshole's gone and we made him die because we let COVID just go. Right? Like, really, these are, I mean, it might seem
That's a good
silly.
question. I mean,
What is the value of
interesting.
dying? Like.
It's a good question. Jarek, were you gonna jump on that,
No,
or you
go
want me
ahead.
to? Yeah. So it's like there are definite benefits for people living. Death is it's a natural process. Life ends in death, and some would argue there's no net benefit to it. But for the dying person, there's a lot of net benefit if that person's suffering, like someone we know. If the person's suffering, the death is a big relief. And same for the family members who are observing that suffering. They don't want to see that person suffer. Just, some of the family members are like, get it over with, because the person's in such pain, right? So there could be some net benefit in someone's death. But I don't think there's an aspect in a copiosis society which is abundant to think that someone dying is one less mouth to feed, because we have enough food to feed all the mouths.
Right.
Yeah. I was just being smart.
No, I get it. Or taking up space, or any other criticism that someone might level on one person leaving the planet.
Right.
Yeah, it could be seen that on the net, someone dying is a net negative benefit. In fact, I know there's a large group of people who agree exactly that. That's why they're trying to upload human beings into machines so that people don't have to die. So, like Jarek said earlier, and we've taken none of our breaks because this has been such a good conversation, but like Jarek said earlier, there are going to be differing values that will be ranked by differing communities. And if, for example, you believe that putting resources into uploading human consciousness into a machine is of high priority because you want to be put into a machine, then you might want to move to that community where you can get rewarded for helping do that kind of research, as opposed to staying. Go ahead, Jarek.
Well, if we give sort of an extreme example of, you could imagine non-human societies that maybe have adopted copiosis at some point, and maybe their life process is so different from the normal human life process. There's an example of a society in this book called Perry. We read this recently, the Piggies.
Oh yeah, Ender's Game.
The follow-up, Speaker for the Dead.
Oh, Speaker for the Dead. Yes.
This civilization of these sentient beings that sort of look like little piggies, but they walk around and they talk and they're pretty smart. And in their culture, they they have these strange rituals where they'll honor one another through a ceremony that includes basically murdering one of the piggies. So it's like the most highly regarded piggy in their community at a certain time, and in order to honor them, they'll literally
butcher them.
Sort of, yeah, butcher them, right,
Yeah.
and then bury them.
Yeah.
And then a tree grows in their place.
Yeah.
And now humans that were observing this piggy society, they kind of saw this as barbaric, right? And they said these piggies they have no morals. They're so terrible. They're just so backwards. Like, this is ridiculous. And at one point, these piggies did something to a human as well, right? Also because they were trying to honor this human, but there's a huge miscommunication because the piggy saw this as a great sign of respect, whereas the human saw this as like basically an act of war. But what the humans were misunderstanding here is that the piggies had a very different understanding of what was happening there. And so the piggies, they actually go through this process where their consciousness transfers into the form of a tree after they die. So for them, it's a great honor to be planted by their brethren, because then they move on to the next stage of life. And so in that community, if they were to adopt something like copiosis, they would probably put a lot of value on honoring another piggy in that way,
Yeah.
in a way that may appear as violent or whatnot to a human.
Yeah.
So you could imagine there, I don't know that human societies would ever diverge to that extent where we would be kind of where we would be able to look at another community where every member of that community is pleased with the things that are happening, and yet another community would look at that community and see that community as being kind of
immoral,
not just immoral, but like barbaric, backwards sort of. And maybe to a certain extent that's true. We do have like communities where, especially nowadays, if you think of see how divided the country seems to be, where we'll call one another insane, and I guess we'll even in some cases we'll call one another evil. But there's still, I think, a for the most part, a collective consensus on the direction of what we want to go in and what we consider to be good things, right? Saving lives is a good thing.
Yes.
Reducing suffering is a good thing. Making sure that people have freedom is a good thing. Making sure that people freedom of speech, freedom to live where they want to live. It's just kind of a matter of how do we balance these things. That's really the main struggle that we have with in our country is we have all these things we agree on, but which ones are more important, right? That's sort of how we see it. At least that's where I see the division here. But it's not so much that we have completely different sets of values. So
there is one circumstance where death is seen, the dying of someone is seen as beneficial, and that's in the case of assisted suicide. Here in Oregon, at least.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, where it's not only legal for someone to help someone die, but it's seen as a beneficial act and therefore sanctioned in law.
Yes, because
and
it's what the person is wishing for. It's what they have. It's what they've requested. It's under their own decision, their own. So
but there certainly are some communities, and probably leaning more religious communities, where that kind of assisted suicide is seen as immoral in all circumstances, and so maybe those communities won't value, somebody coming in and doing that.
Exactly. And that's fine. And that's fine.
Right.
If you want that to happen, you're just gonna go to the place where it can happen.
That's right.
And you don't have to change anybody else's beliefs or, thoughts or anything. It's just but you still have the freedom to make that happen. So, and you can find people that support what you want, I just don't think that will change. So
to me, the key is that each member of the community can have everything they want, right? That's sort of the goal with any community is, and if you're unhappy in that community, you have the freedom to find one that maybe fits your value system better.
Or start your own.
Or start your own.
There you go. Yeah. So, all right. So we totally got off the
Well,
topic, I
so
think.
so well, I was going
Or
to tie
did
it.
we?
I was going to tie it in. So it's one could hear this conversation and go, hell, you three can't even come to agreement amongst yourselves. How are you going to get the whole world to come to an agreement in a copiosis environment? And
Right,
this is where people start to think that copiosis is impossible because you've got all
right.
these people who have different perspectives, and sometimes they get so
Yes,
strident in their perspective that they want to kill other people for their perspective. And so how
right.
are you going to get a system in place that doesn't have like the rule of law governing people so that the people, quote unquote, act right? And this
Yeah,
is where people
exactly.
start to think that copiosis is impossible. And the answer, from
Right,
my
yes.
perspective, is that humanity already is showing evidence that it's already moving in the direction of a society that allows greater levels of freedom. And as humanity, this is my opinion, as humanity continues to outgrow our current levels of allowed freedom, we're discovering, just like a pair of pants that fit too tight, that our current system of that offers the freedom we've currently enjoyed for hundreds of years isn't big enough. And so people are going to
And
reach.
isn't free enough.
That's what I mean. Yeah, it's not free enough. In fact, it's not free at all when you think about what freedom could look like. And so they're going to
Mhm.
ask for something different. And in the asking, people smarter than us will come up with the answers that we can't answer. And that's why it's just like with any other invention. The inventor isn't always the person who comes up with all the answers. Sometimes that person assembles about himself smarter people who answers the questions that he can't
Right,
answer. And that's what we're
right.
doing. We're in the process of assembling those people around us. Yeah.
That are,
Well,
that know all the aspects. It's just like, Jarek has the technology side of it, and um, you know, the all the people have different skills that they're bringing. Not sure why I'm here.
you're here to be the devil's advocate. And people like Jarek bring his unique perspective. Carrie
Yeah,
brings his unique perspective with construction and
yes,
land. And Simone brings her perspective with regard to her expertise on Twitter. And she's answered a big question wasn't able to answer and has been very successful at it. There are lots of people who are bringing their unique perspective and answering questions that I don't have the answer. And as a result, moving copiosis forward. And it's just going to be like that moment after moment after moment after moment until one day copiosis is the new economic reality.
right. So we only have a few minutes left. Did you want to
KJ
do a
had some
break
comments
thing
here.
or?
Yeah, KJ had some comments. So
Oh,
he had a lot of comments. So I'm just going to throw some of these up here. He says he's in regards to the question of who dies and who doesn't. He said that's a question for Charles Darwin to answer. And then with regard to uh, people being a-holes, he says people wouldn't have to be a-holes if everyone got their basic needs met. That's a good comment. Interesting profile picture, by the way. And then he also said that he enjoys these human forms as opposed to being up in a machine. And then he follows up with, he can't imagine a machine could beat all the wonderful sensory pleasures of being physical.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good comment. And then he also adds the prime directive, saying to Jarek specifically with regard to an alien race that has a different perspective on
Yeah.
looking at the world the way we do. And then finally, he
Yeah.
adds that there was an episode in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that was similar to what we were talking about with regard to the Piggies. And that's interesting because I'm going to be reading that series over again. And so I look forward to consuming that part of that book again. Were there any
So,
other comments, Jared? I didn't see any others.
getting back to his comment, it's like, geez, I totally lost my train of thought. But getting back to what he was saying about the prime directive, like Star Trek, the prime directive, I assume that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Like you go out there and you observe, but you do no harm, right? So copiosis to me is like, you kind of start from that place where you go out and you're observing and you're looking at different interests that you might have and see you're not trying to do any harm to them. But if you like this particular thing and that excites you, like let's say cleaning plastic out of the ocean, and that excites you, and that's becomes your passion, and then you've investigated, you've observed, you've come to conclusions, but you haven't done any harm while you're doing that, right? But then you can adapt in that process, and you can become a part of that process to do that thing,
And this is why I think copiosis is going to work, because it's a way of structuring our society in a way that we perceive one another to not be doing any harm to one another.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It allows us to organize our society in a way that we no longer perceive like somebody is taking something from us, right? Like either taking our taxes,
There's not
taking our money.
Yeah.
There's not competition.
And there's no force, right? It's like I'm not being forced to do anything I don't want to do. My money isn't being forcibly taken from me and you being used to do things I don't consent to. Whether or not it's, whatever it is, right? Even if it's something that other people think is fine, like if right now there's a lot of people that are angry that their tax dollars are going to fund things like war or abortion or things like that. Right. All these things that they don't agree to, and so they feel like they're sort of being forced into supporting those things, and in a way they are. That's a totally valid perception. But it's all about how do we shift our perceptions in a way that allows us to stop seeing one another as enemies and start seeing each other as collaborators in creating the kind of world that we all want to see.
And of course, there's going to be people who we observe and we think that they're not contributing to a better world, that they're, for whatever reason, whatever our perception is, that they're not creating to a better world. But I think
that copiosis expands our perception of what it means to contribute, right? So it allows us to see somebody that maybe today, because capitalism doesn't recognize them as valuable, it would be harder to perceive that person as valuable. But in a world where somebody's sitting around, I don't know, doing anything that involves anyone else and making their life even a little bit better, that's something
like
we can recognize as valuable.
Or drugs, selling drugs, or whatever. I mean,
playing video games, right? I mean, whatever.
Playing video games, whatever.
If you're somehow contributing to somebody else that gets to make those video games, and that's their passion, and their passion is making people happy playing those video games, you're creating value for that person by giving them the opportunity to earn NBR through playing video games or through making video games, right?
I mean, it could be a way to relieve stress. So, or it might create more stress. While you're doing in that game, right? But it is a sort of a kind of, I don't know. I don't really want to get into opinions on video games. I think they're awesome in some cases and horrible in others, but whatever.
But Jarek is right. It's like today, not hardly anything you do in the involvement of another person is valued and compensated for. But in copiosis, pretty much everything you do that involves another person, you get rewards for. And that's going to cause, that's going to cause what Jarek was talking about, where people feel much more free and far less infringed upon. And so talking about looping this back to freedom of speech, there's not going to be, there's like KJ was saying earlier, there are less people wanting to foment revolution and anger and hatred in a world where everyone is free and can do whatever they want.
KJ has another comment. He said, I suspect that in copiosis, the sex trade would not exist, at least not in its present form, and working on a blog post about that for Valentine's Day. If you mean sex trade as in like sex slavery, yeah, absolutely. There would be no room for that, I think. But, sex work I don't think that's going to go away.
I agree.
No, and I see that There's a need for it, obviously, or it wouldn't exist. But
And there's people that enjoy sex work, like that's something they're really passionate about.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
be it. But it's you're forced into.
Sorry.
So
That's
we're
okay.
at the end, aren't we?
We are. We're totally at the top of the hour. So let me close this by saying thank you, everybody who participated, including KJ, our commenter, and those others who are watching the live stream on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. You've been watching Devil's Advocate with Jill Dell and myself, Perry Gruber, and Jarek Spigner, our CTO, as our guest attendee. Hopefully we'll have him back again because he does a great job fielding some of these questions. And it's always nice to have a third person involved. If you're interested in finding out more about copiosis, you can go to our website right here and find out all you might want to know. If you're interested in becoming a patron or seeing where the money goes that we're getting to make this innovation a reality, you can go to the second website and find out more. If you're interested in interacting with people like ourselves in real time, you can go to our Copiosis social group on Facebook. Just search for Copiosis social group and you'll find it. And there are almost 1,000 people on Facebook talking about what we're doing to make copiosis a reality. Finally, I want to thank Jarek, who is no longer on his camera, and Jill, oh, there he is, for participating today. And we will see you all next week. And I promise we'll have breaks in that episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.